Well, thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited to have you on as a guest today. And I thought it was really incredible because as we released our episode tying in the CIA and their history in regards to these biolabs, within that same week, your interview came out on Tucker Carlson. So for our guests, or for our audience, and anyone who's not aware, this is Dr. Andrew Huff, who has recently made his appearance on Tucker Carlson. He's written a book called The Truth About Wuhan: How I Uncovered the Biggest Lie in History. And Andrew, you actually blew the whistle on EcoHealth Alliance, their gain of function research in Wuhan. Let's get into that quickly. How exactly did you do that?
Sure. So I actually submitted a bunch of whistleblower complaints to various members of the U.S. Senate. So Senator Rand Paul, Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Marshall. I submitted whistleblower complaints with all the different agencies that were involved with funding or sponsoring the gain of function research or were involved with the sponsoring of EcoHealth Alliance. That would have been USDA, Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, really an alphabet soup of agencies.
And what was the overall response in regards to you reaching out to all these agencies?
Well, that's pretty funny. I only received responses from two agencies. I received one response from the Office of the Inspector General at Health and Human Services, and I received a response from the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense actually was interested in investigating it, and then it sort of went in the black box, and I never heard anything. NIH was only interested in financial fraud happening at EcoHealth Alliance, and otherwise they refused to touch anything related to the gain of function work. And the remainder of the whistleblower complaints that I filed, I haven't received any response.
That's pretty incredible. And what was your process? I've worked with whistleblowers in the past. Now, what was your process in building up some protection, some layers of protection? Did you seek out legal advice, or I mean, how did you go about blowing the whistle in a way that, it wouldn't come back and devastate your life?
Sure. So the first thing I did is I lawyered up. I had several different attorneys representing me, which I still have until to this day. And then I also elevated my media profile, and writing the book was a method of self protection. So basically, I put most of the critical facts from the book and then went on the media blitz selling the book. So that is what elevated the story, protected me at the same time, and got the story out.
That's a really brilliant way of going about it. Oftentimes whistleblowers, sometimes they come out, throw their lives on the line and, see how everything lands. And it can be a pretty gruesome process for them. So it sounds like you had a good game plan there. Now, our series, Pacific Atrocities Education, it's really focused on the untold stories of history, especially in regards to the World War II era. Now, you reviewed the episode, which I appreciate so much you taking the time to do that. Looking back at World War II and seeing how the US shielded Japan's Unit 731 scientists for their bioweapons data, are you able to see parallels from that moment in how governments around the world today justify this unethical science in the name of national security? What were some of the insights you pulled from that episode?
Well, I looked at it as more of a review in history for my training as a scientist in bio warfare and biodefense. And I guess the big takeaway is when there's a war or somebody loses the war, those scientists go somewhere and they need to be employed. And they're also highly valuable to the person that won the war or to another foreign power. So uh, the reality is when you're a scientist that works in national security or intelligence or biodefense, all the global governments and power brokers watch you because they know that you're usually fairly smart, you're qualified, you wound up into that position, you know a lot of inside information, and you're valuable to perpetuating the next program.
Understood. Yeah, and it was really interesting, to see kind of in that historical lens how the CIA came in. They protected him, they got that data, they actually contracted Shiro Ishii until his old age. And you can see how that repetition, that practice occurs today. So if we can bring it into today's landscape, who are some of those scientists that you think some of those bad actors or people that were highly involved in COVID, at least, you know, who are these people and how are they being protected now?
Sure. So I don't know how, to what degree that all the scientists are being protected. One key player is by the name of Dr. Ralph Barrick. He's at the University of North Carolina, and he's one of the most brilliant gain of function scientists and scientists in the sciences, broadly speaking. I don't know if he's so much being protected. It seems like he is. The one interesting thing is when he was called to uh, testify at the COVID select hearing in the House, he had a closed door session. So maybe that's a form of protection. The other interesting thing is it appears that he told the truth about many things, which the other scientists who testified in front of Congress lied about, like my former boss, Dr. Peter Daszak. Dr. Peter Daszak was not so much an individual contributor scientist, but was a scientist that basically organized much of the program and the individuals and managed the relationships of all these different international parties, NGOs, companies involved, and with the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. The one thing I'd like to point out is that a lot of the relationships that EcoHealth Alliance had with foreign laboratories and foreign governments and foreign NGOs were not all that bad. Like a lot of it was traditional surveillance work or sort of quasi public health work. And it was only the relationship that we had with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was truly unique.
And can you go into that relationship a little bit more?
Sure. So there were two different ways that this there's how this was framed publicly and what really happened operationally speaking. So the way that this was framed was that there was this United States Agency for International Development. They had this big program called Predict, and they had been telling everyone that they were going to predict and forecast pandemics. Well, when you actually looked under the hood of all this, they weren't collecting enough data. It wasn't systematic. It wasn't routine. They weren't feeding the information fast enough into a system where you could actually build something as complex as forecasting a pandemic. The modeling and simulation quantitative aspects of epidemiology is what I do. And once I was added to the project and I dug into this, it was clear that they weren't able to do this. And then you ask the question, well, what are they doing? Well, the thing that they were actually doing is that they were going out and collecting all these different viral samples to create a genetic database to then transfer to laboratories which were engaged in gain of function technology, which is basically weaponization of viruses to make medical countermeasures or vaccines. And what was unique about the Wuhan Institute of Virology is the when it all clicked for me, it's a fun question to ask. I mean, do you think the Chinese need $400,000 of U.S. funding to conduct viral research?
Hmm. Interesting
No, it's a question.
question.
I mean, no. I mean, do you think they need four hundred thousand
Like
dollars? I mean, we're talking about
$400,000.
China.
I mean, I'm not an expert enough to know. Would they be helping us develop those resources? I mean, is there a partnership there or is it just for them exclusively? If it's just for them exclusively, I would say why? We could toss that somewhere else. If it was some type of collaborative partnership, you know, maybe it could make sense.
Well, I think
What's your
you're
opinion on
starting
it?
to get to the. Well, I think it's obvious, and I think you were headed down the right track. And I probably sort of hit you with a not expected question, which is okay. So the Chinese, they're a world superpower, arguably, right? So they don't need $400,000 of U.S. government funding to conduct gain of function research. What they needed was advanced biotechnology. So what was happening was that we were actually transferring advanced biotechnology, in my opinion, illegally from the United States to China. Because the other thing that was pretty well known about the Wuhan Institute of Virology is that it was the Chinese bioweapons laboratory. And I used to work in one of these, top secret type labs in the United States. And typically, you don't allow your enemy to go for a walk and go tour your laboratory, even come on the premises, right? It's a top secret facility. So it begs the question, what were the Chinese getting from this? And they're very clearly getting advanced American biotechnology that had weaponization potential. And specifically, if you look at how this played out over time, they were actually getting defense technology that was being invested into through various government channels, but mainly the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Through this program called Preempt, they brought together scientists from all over the planet on these proposals to generate these crazy, I shouldn't say really crazy, but futuristic proposals that had defense applications. So, it begs the question, what were the Chinese doing, collaborating with American scientists for Department of Defense, now Department of War, scientific proposal? I mean, that's really strange, right? And
It's
this is how the
concerning. And
technology
how
for,
do we go? Oh, go ahead.
oh no, I can pause there. It's fine.
No, it is concerning, and I'm wondering, how do we make sure, as an American, as our government, how do we make sure to secure those resources and make sure that they're not being exported to different countries?
That's a great question. So we already have the mechanism in place. It's called export control. So if you're a scientist working at a major institution, a private sector laboratory, an academic institution or university, or if you're an employee of the government, to even work with a country like China, you have to send all of your proposals and all of your proposed work through this process called export control. So what export control does is they look for technology which is unique to the United States, which has potentially some defense application or has national security applications. And if that's really valuable technology, and the United States is the only country that possesses that, we want to protect that. And while I worked at EcoHealth Alliance, I was not aware of any of our technology or information going through this export control process. Export control is typically handled by the State Department or the CIA or the Department of Defense, but there are six or five other agencies that also have sort of their hand in the export control domain. So, it begs the question, why didn't this go through export control? And if it did go through export control, who signed off on it and who approved it? And there was a law passed while President Biden was still in office to release and declassify all of the COVID era related information. And it was bipartisanly supported. All 100 senators signed off on the bill. It went to President Biden's desk. He signed off on it. And then they were supposed to declassify all the information related to SARS-CoV-2 or COVID. And instead, what they did is they had the former director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, release a 2-page, I guess, executive summary of what was contained in the classified information instead of actually releasing all the documents. So to this day, they still haven't released all the information, even though there's a law in the book saying that they're supposed to.
Interesting. And where are we in the process of getting those potentially, actually declassified? Or did someone just drop the ball and the world's moved on? Where are we with that?
Well, I think it's just politics at this point. This is very damning for the Trump administration. It's also damning for the Biden administration. Everyone who's involved with this over the last, I guess 5 going on 6 years now, they don't want to release this because there's a number of different serious implications from the truth of what really happened, and we're beyond the point where this could factually be a natural emergence event. There's no chance that this was a natural emergence event. So that leaves only 2 potential possibilities. It was either an accidental release from a laboratory, or somebody or multiple groups of people intentionally released it. And one of the things that I point out is that typically when we have a pandemic of this scope and magnitude, or even when we've had epidemics, typically we go sample all the different blood banks that have made donations through the period of time when the outbreak occurred or when we think it occurred. And you analyze all those samples and you look for donations that either contain the virus or they don't, or antibodies, because that serves as the historical record. So then these are spatially located because these blood banks are located not universally, but around population centers all over the United States. You can start to get a determination of where and how it's spread across the United States. You can also go one step further and do molecular testing on the agent itself to see how it evolved and look at the phylogenetic tree, which tells you a lot more about how and when the disease moved around. And these studies haven't been done. They've been done for pretty much every other outbreak in history. And this just leads to more unanswered questions. So why haven't we released, or why haven't they released the classified COVID information? And why haven't they conducted the studies which would prove the origin of the virus? And not only the origin, but the timing of it.
Absolutely. Do you think, and there were a few people that reached out to me after watching the breakdown of episode 3, and they're like, "Well, what do you want to come out of this?" And I'm like, "Well, we need some type of accountability. We need answers. And we also need laws to protect us, or some type of safeguard to make sure that this never happens again." So, is that process, is it possible to remove the government out of it, because we know how the government moves? It's very slow. People want to protect their side. Is there some type of independent research through, with scientists around the world, that this study, this investigation could actually be conducted?
Absolutely. But the problem is, I think the people, even the high wealth people that could sponsor or pay for the research, um, don't want to don't want the answer. And the academic health centers where most epidemiologists and pathologists or bacteriologists and virologists and the people who have the types of skills necessary to conduct the research, those institutions or organizations don't want the answer to this. It's a hot potato. And if the government's not going to take the lead and say, we're going to conduct this research, I don't think anyone's going to touch it. On top of it, those blood banks are private companies, and they're not going to allow people to come poking in to go find an answer that they don't want either. So I don't think you could make the argument by saying something as broad as the entire system's corrupt, but the entire system is incentivized for everyone to not want to find the answer. And that's very unfortunate. Another organization that could in theory conduct this same study would be the Department of Defense, because the Department of Defense takes samples from other recruits as they enter the military, and those actually go into a facility where they're saved for a long period of time. So there's a lot of different ways you could get the correct answer, but I'm afraid that there's no independent body that is in a position to do it unless they have the political will or power behind them to do so. And as far as scientists self-regulating gain of function work or bioweapons research, I actually helped draft the bill to ban gain of function in the state of Michigan. And in hindsight, I'm glad that bill didn't pass. And that might sound sort of strange, but I've been thinking real deep and hard about this for years. And it's the world's in a strange place because everybody's engaging in this gain of function research because we're afraid of foreign threats. So that's why this type of research happens. Also, there's gain of function technology, which is used for peaceful purposes, which are good. For example, most people don't know that gain of function research is used to make insulin. So there's a lot of different types of gain of function. Typically, what we're concerned about is the gain of function, which is on select agents, and these are agents which have diseases which have pandemic potential. But the reality is that the scientific discovery and technology engineering around life sciences is advancing so rapidly, I don't think it can be regulated effectively by the government. And I also don't think that there's a chance with the current global climate, I don't think there's a good chance for an international treaty around bioweapons development, a new one. The existing treaty that we have is not enforceable, and not all the important nations globally signed on to it anyways. And I fear that it would be a lot of effort spent just to sort of wind up with the same existing treaty that we have right now.
I
And
agree with that
that's not, it's not,
analysis. Yeah. No, I agree with that analysis. And I was talking to a professor about this whole thing. And, the idea of a treaty came up. And he's like, well, what if the enemy doesn't want to abide by that treaty? And we can see, taking it back to history, right? So in World War II, General Shiro Ishii saw, okay, we're having Geneva Conventions. They're talking about, putting laws around this. If it's so dangerous, that's what we need to go and develop. And so they went and started developing Unit 731, biological weapons, practicing vivisections on prisoners of war, and it just went from there. And so it's like a treaty. Okay, what? It's a piece of paper. Who's gonna abide by that? And it takes so much time and effort. So where are the safeguards, Dr. Huff? Because this is quite concerning.
well, you really have to depend on the science, the ethics and the values of the scientists that conduct the research. And that's not very reassuring. But back to your point, most of these treaties are not enforceable. Unless they're enforceable, they're not any good. So we're in a really difficult. We have a real. We have a real. I guess a real. Um, we have a really. We have. We're in a really strange place in history with the pace that technological advancement is occurring. And the only way that we're going to be able to protect ourselves is by, I believe, having strong family values, training our scientists ethically, because this is very much a case of you have to trust a person that's working with potentially life and death of many people in their hands to do the right thing. And you can't watch these people all the time. And you have to believe that they're doing this for the right reasons and they're being as safe as possible. Now, at the institutions that do this type of work, you can create what they call in security defense in depth. So you have layered physical security, you have strong information and cybersecurity protections, um, background investigations where they're necessary and the people involved, and then also an intelligence component or a counterintelligence component watching over those people to protect them from harmful adversaries. And that's exactly how it works in the national lab system. One of the things that I had been advocating for is that most of this research that is very advanced should be conducted in the by one of the NNSA labs, and that stands for National Nuclear Administration Labs. And everyone's like, why would you do this research at one of those labs? Because they have very tight security, or USAM would be another laboratory that's a Department of Defense laboratory, because they have the security protocols in place and systems to protect and really defend against bad or malicious actors from doing things to the scientist or stealing the work. And then really that's the top concern. If you look at Dr. Ralph Barrick's laboratory in North Carolina, for example, it's at a public institution. I'm sure I've never been there. I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt that it has strong security, but they have had a number of leaks there where their laboratory employees have became infected with something, and then they were picked up at the local healthcare provider as having something they acquired in the lab. So this is one of the realities when you're working at least with pathogens in the laboratories, that there is some exposure risks, and sometimes the people working in the lab do get sick and then transmit that disease outside. The transmission of that disease continues outside the laboratory.
Yeah, and talking about where these bioweapons are developed, I think that's a really key point to dig into a little bit. And I had someone send me a map. You've probably seen it, of all the biolabs that exist all over the world. Are you familiar with this one?
I've seen several
It
of
it
these,
like
and
tracks, yeah. And I'm looking at, because I'm in California, so I'm looking at the map and I'm like, oh, interesting. There's one at UCLA, and so this kind of falls back. If we look into history, we can see Shiro Ishii, the general, the inventor behind this terrible Unit 731 lab. He actually was going out and working with university students and pulling them in. So can you kind of describe a bit what the university's roles are when it comes to this type of research.
It really varies. So basically, it usually happens like this. You either have a politician, a university president, or someone powerful within the university, or a research professor who's really good at their job, and they secure a very large contract or grant, either from a private institution or from the government, to build a research laboratory to investigate a highly pathogenic disease or a select agent. And so it's government sponsored, or it might be private sector sponsored in some way. The laboratory gets established and then they begin conducting work. And where it happens is sometimes dependent on the other facilities which are available at the university. So there, through the contract review process or grant review process, you have to be able to prove that you're capable of doing the work. So oftentimes it's a build it and they will come scenario. So the university and the professors involved and the other, I guess you could say, stakeholders in the community get together and say, we want to build this laboratory. They build the laboratory, then they apply for the contracts or the grants for specific research projects, and then they get to work. And they're usually in large population centers, which have a well-educated population. So these are, you can argue if it's a chicken or egg scenario for the university, but a lot of these end up in the Northeast Corridor in Massachusetts, near Washington, D.C., the Research Triangle, University of Wisconsin, University of Minnesota, University of Iowa, West Coast, the Bay Area, or far Southern California near San Diego. These are the sort of research hotspots. There's quite a bit in Texas too, in their research triangle area, and then also down in Houston, Galveston area. So there are a number of places where this research is being done in the United States and abroad. I think the United States is further ahead than many other countries. And when you look at this lab, you say these are all the biolabs that are around the world doing research. Well, everyone's got a university near their. Most people are within pretty close proximity of a research university that has a BSL-2 laboratory at a minimum. And if you have a USDA sponsored animal health laboratory, you probably have a BSL-3 laboratory near you. There's four levels of BSL. 4 is like the worst or the most dangerous. So, the point that I'm getting at here is that you shouldn't be really afraid of what the laboratories are. It's more concerning what specific laboratories are doing. And that's a much smaller list. There's much fewer laboratories that are engaged in gain of function research on pathogens of pandemic potential.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense, just depending on the coding and the level, because I don't know what UCLA is up to and what they, landed them on that map. But, the risk level, it's probably not a level 4 is what you're saying. It's
Correct. Yeah.
it's probably not high level. Yeah, got it. Now, you had mentioned, I mean, either way, it's interesting. And, I think that there is a positive side to train the next generation in these technologies. Obviously, we want to be ahead of the curve, but it's also, I don't think many people know universities have that relationship with biolabs and help with that development and that research. It's an interesting little piece of information. Now, you had mentioned the Department of Defense and medical agencies being really key in next steps. So, and maybe finding some type of justice. What are the chances of the Department of Defense getting involved in finding the origins of COVID, calling out the bad actors? I mean, will we ever see it in our lifetime? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. So the first, let's take the first part of that. So the first question is we're on the outside, right? So maybe some people in the Department of Defense have this all figured out already, and they already know the answers to all the questions which I posed at the beginning of this conversation that we're having. That's a possibility. And the same could go for the CIA or the Director of National Intelligence Office. So this, there's a scenario where these people already all know the answer. It's classified top secret and nobody's talking about it. That's a possibility. And maybe that's why there's nothing happening at the Department of Defense. I had been advocating of using the United States Courts of Military Justice which is how the military court system works. So the rules which are set under U.S. code and the authorization to do that, to bring, it's first to conduct a classified investigation, which I'll explain in a second. And if there was anything that was worth criminally pursuing, they could do it under UCMJ. It would not be the first time that they used UCMJ against civilians who'd been working with the
And
Department of Defense.
UCMJ stand, what does UCMJ stand for?
The United States Courts of Military Justice.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
Yes. And so everyone who served in the military is very familiar with it, because this is every time you get in trouble, it's something, could be something related to UCMJ. So this
Understood.
this court this court system also applies to civilians who work with the Department of Defense. And the reason why I think this is more appropriate is because there's a risk to the U.S. government here that they're going to acquire and assemble a lot of information together, which doesn't typically happen. And there's this law or rule in the U.S. government called classification through compilation, which means if you, as an individual, take a bunch of information, you put it together, you synthesize it, you might have material sources and methods all in one place, and that is information that can be weaponized in some way. And that's where classification protections come in to either protect intelligence information or U.S. technology. That's what classification is all about: intelligence or technology, protecting those two things. The problem is we're going to have intelligence and technology all being assembled for a trial. And then you think you're going to prosecute someone, and then you want to put all of this information that you just accumulated and assembled and organized together in a nice package and then put that out for the world to see it. I think that's a very bad idea. And I used to be in the camp or of the opinion that we should have public trials through the Department of Justice and use the normal federal court system. And I think that's a bad idea now for the reason that I just said. Now, what are the chances of this happening? To the last part of your question, right now I'm pretty black pill about the whole thing. I don't think there's going to be anything of substance to come in terms of holding people accountable. There were a lot of promises made during the last presidential campaign, and I feel like a lot of those promises are not being kept in terms of COVID accountability. People keep saying, "Well, it's early into the Trump administration. Give it time." And I don't know how much time they need to declassify the COVID documents, or to begin investigations, or to go through the legal process, whether it's the Department of Justice or through the Department of Defense. I can tell you what I feel, and I feel like it's taking too long. And that's my personal belief. Maybe there's going to be something that happens, but as time goes on, I become more and more skeptical that anything will actually happen.
And what's your opinion? I mean, what's your reaction, I should say, when we hear people like Fauci and Bill Gates and Governor Cuomo coming out and saying there's going to be another one? Just get ready for the next there's going to be another global pandemic. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
Well, so historically, they're not wrong when they say that. Where the humans will always have more pandemics. It's always the when question. Though, are they implying that another one's going to happen within the next year or two? Because that would be really weird. So if it is coming across a threat, that would be very catastrophic. I also think that it would maybe it would also influence the assessment around what happened in the first or the most recent pandemic we had, which was COVID, which would make it look like it was intentional, right? So I don't know if this is some kind of strange bluff or flex on their part, if they're just trying to scare everyone. I mean, they're definitely trying to scare everyone. But the question then is why, and is this a real type of insinuation or threat? I don't know. It's weird. I
It's
wouldn't
just
engage in that
wild.
kind of behavior. Yeah, I wouldn't engage in that kind of behavior. But then again, these people have been operating on check for a long period of time, so they're getting away with it.
You mentioned in Tucker's interview, Secretary Hedgeseth. Am I saying his name correctly? I hope I am.
Hey, Seth.
Now, thank you. You mentioned he has the ability to actually execute this investigation into all the things that happen, all the bad actors. would it be beneficial for the public to put some type of pressure on him to continue to advocate? Yes, we want this information. We want some type of transparency. Obviously, we get it, right? The world is in a very volatile place. We don't have many allies. There's talks about World War III. It's a very sensitive topic. But I mean, if there's someone in a role that could do something about it, even if we don't, as the public, don't get access to that information, at least there's some type of accountability. What's your thoughts on him?
I think I like Secretary Hegseth. I think he's a tremendous leader of the Department of War, formerly Department of Defense. I always also like Tulsi Gabbard, as she's the Director of National Intelligence. So I think those two people together, working together, could get to the bottom of this. There's already an executive order in place for Director Gabbard's office to investigate some of the aspects and the weaponization of things related to COVID. I don't know where she is in that process. I don't know if she's appointed someone to lead that investigation, but if they actually conduct the investigation, she already has the power to do so through an executive order. In part, also, like you alluded to, or what you stated, that Secretary Hegseth could sign the order essentially to initiate the investigation. The other thing that's unique about the Department of Defense is that any flag officer can initiate this type of investigation. They have signature authority from Congress to do so. I've spoken with a few other people who are military law experts, and there's been some debate whether or not the president would have to also sign off on it, or Congress would have to approve. But the mere fact that we're discussing this and nobody's shutting down, everyone thinks that is a viable and reasonable solution, which is good. How they actually execute it, that's up to our elected officials to decide. But I do believe it's a possible solution to this problem.
Well, Tulsi Gabbard has done an amazing job in regards to the Russiagate situation. I mean, she's really dug into that. And I think she's been doing a great job with everything. So if anyone can do it, it's these people, right? If anyone can make it happen, it's them. So fingers crossed here. Now, at the end of your conversation with Tucker, there was this moment that I think you blackpilled Tucker. Okay. Like I feel like he walked away from that conversation depressed. And it's because, you were talking about the ability to engineer synthetic pathogens, the ability, the capability of anyone to essentially make a virus with codes. Quite concerning. Can you kind of describe that conversation a bit? Summarize that for our audience if they're not aware, because that was really just shocking, and I could relate to Tucker's reaction of like, where is the hope for the future? It's just quite disturbing. So share with our audience a bit about that.
Well, I'm not so down on it. So I look at this from a very positive and optimistic perspective. I'm not excited about it because it's a dual use technology. So the first way to frame this is think about how some people looked at electricity when it was invented. Some people were terrified of it. They thought it was witchcraft, it was magic, don't use that electricity stuff. And now look how it's basically improved human lifespan, our everyday living, clean water, sanitation, all these things. So electrification was a good thing in the end. So synthetic life is a broad, and it's not necessarily a good term, because what we're really talking about are synthetic units at this point. It's not self-replicating, which I'll get to in a second. So there's multiple different pathways taking place of development. So you can clone a virus. You're at the point where you can clone a bacteria synthetically. So you can take the ingredients it takes to generate that thing. Okay. Now, they're talking about making carbon-based synthetic life, silicone-based synthetic life. Then you have these nanotechnology, which are like nanobots. And some of the synthetic life has the nanobots incorporated into its cell structure, its unit structure. So you can produce many of these tiny things that do a job. In the future of how these things will be controlled, they will be likely controlled by computers. And there's even research happening right now where the synthetic form of these units are being used to construct biocomputers. So basically, instead of sending electrical signals across a bunch of these little tiny units, they send chemical signal coding, sort of like how your brain works, to fire and transfer, to fire the electricity like in your synapse, or to transfer information through chemical signaling. So these are all different independent pipelines of this tiny unit synthetic life research which are happening. What I'm starting to see is that it's getting to the point where these are starting to converge because they're adopting, incorporating other parts of the technology into each other. And then it's just a matter of what the application is going to be. So how are they going to use these things? And if you look at how this technology has been used in the past and look at human history, you can almost guarantee that weaponization will be one of the areas. And instead of using it to attack animals and people or plants, I believe that this new technology will actually be used to attack equipment like satellites, tanks, armor, sensor arrays, computers. And the main hangup right now is that they haven't got it to self-replicate yet. And that's a major technical obstacle, which is, I think, being worked on at a few places right now. But we haven't crossed that barrier yet. And once that barrier is crossed, once the technology is developed to make these tiny units self-replicating, then you basically have something that can grow and reproduce and replace itself. And that becomes what sort of, I think, scary. And the other question is, how long did these tiny units live, for a bit lack of a better word, out in the environment in the real world? Like, how are they powered? The power thing they've got by some of these tiny little things they developed are solar powered. Some are powered by use something called the MEM circuit, micro electromechanical system, which has this little thing called an attenuator. And if you hit it with a microwave, for example, it vibrates and that functions as a little microscopic motor. So they've got a lot of this technology has all been figured out. And it's just a matter of how it gets applied. And I think it's going to be used in agriculture first. I think it's going to be used against equipment first. In agriculture and medicine, the potential uses are positive, right? So they want to use it to have better yields in crops. They want to use it to probably eliminate cancers or to treat other conditions which are difficult to treat. So really, you have to be careful when discussing these things too, because there's what's possible, and then there's what's science fiction, and then trying to figure out where we are between those two things, because there's a lot of sort of hot air, of what people saying they can do, and then what we've seen and what we can prove. And because this is new emerging technology, it's hard to know exactly where we are. It's sort of like, your audience might be more familiar with quantum computing. So quantum computing has really been a focus of research for 15 to 20 years now. And the first real major breakthrough of quantum computing appeared to have happened just this past week. So the point that I was making
And
on
what
Tucker
was
Carlson.
that breakthrough? What was it?
Oh God, you're gonna have to make me talk about something that I don't know very well. Basically, it had to do with the software processing. I think it was on the software side. They actually got like software to work at the quantum scale. So,
Interesting. We
and
don't,
I
we
might be
don't
way
have
out,
to go all the
and I,
way in.
and I
It's
and I might
okay.
be
It's
and
interesting.
I might be out, completely off on that too. So I might be wrong. Maybe someone will watch this and then correct me. Because I just saw it pop up my X feed and I saw the article and I liked it. I retweeted. I'm like, read through it. It was interesting. But
Fascinating.
but the point of all that is quantum computing has been around for a long time. This nanotechnology and synthetic life technology has been around for a while. I really sense though we're at the point where we're probably 5 to 10 years out from the next significant advantage or technological leap, I should say, in this technology. It's getting close, and that's why I'm concerned about it.
Very interesting. Now, I think this is a really great point that you made, and I want to hone in on the practical applications of it. You talked about training the next generation of scientists to choose ethics over ambition. And that's one thing that we really advocate for in this series, Deadly Science, is we always want to encourage strong ethics in the medical as well as the technological fields because it matters, right? So, what is a practical way that you could see that training up those next generations with really strong ethics. What does that look like in your mind?
Well, it all starts with the professors and the education system. So if you have students who are going down the research path, and usually these students self-identify, like they self-select themselves into a research pathway and they start working in laboratories, they go on to get research master's degrees or PhDs. Basically the scientists should be training and mentoring those students to be one leaders, so to have effective leadership skills. A lot of times academics and scientists are terrible leaders because they've just been trained to do research and focus on the research, not so much mentoring and coaching their students. And there's two parts to this. So you need the mentoring and the coaching piece, and through working with someone who's ethical, that should, in that environment, that should rub off on them. The other side is they should actually have ethics training be a part of the curriculum for undergraduate students, master's students, and graduate students. And I've sat on these committees before when I was a professor, and in different meetings like this when I was a graduate student. If the universities are in a difficult position, so are the departments in all areas of science, because all the faculty want to teach their students everything. But, you know, in college or in an academic setting, I mean, it's only realistic to ask so much of your students. I mean, if you can only take 12 or 15 semesters of credit and you have to get this done in 4 years to graduate, you just can't keep adding more courses to their curriculum because it just becomes way over the credit threshold. If it takes 120 credits to graduate at a 4-year institution, for example, on the semester system, then you can't continually add courses. So the problem is the trade-off. So if you add a course on ethics, what comes off their plate? So this is the hang up. But I'd argue that something needs to come off their plate because we're training scientists to be highly unethical. In fact, we're doing the opposite. We're training them to be unethical, especially at the graduate student and graduate student level, by teaching the mentality like you have to win and win at any cost. And I think that's a terrible lesson.
I completely agree, and I think our audience would as well. Dr. Andrew Huff, thank you so much for your time and your advocacy and your insights. I mean, I've learned so much from the interview you did with Tucker and our conversation today. So I really appreciate it. What's next for you? What are you doing now, and what are some of your goals?
Oh, some people are still trying to put me into the Trump administration. I've been pretty adamant as of late that I do not want to be appointed into one of those positions. At one point, I sort of did want that, and I don't want that anymore. I don't want to take one of those leadership positions. Um, so I'm actually developing and working on the surveillance system for the synthetic life. I've been working with the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, and I just started that process a week or two. I gave them actually the proposal on to how to solve this problem as part of going on to Tucker Carlson, and they're intrigued by that. And otherwise, after I guess the stretch of advocacy work and book writing is done, I'm interviewing to be a faculty member, like a full professor at a couple different institutions, or like a research manager, but a department chair, or like an assistant dean at a few other places. Or I'm going back to an executive to be executive manager in a healthcare system. So I'm interviewing at all these different places right now. I'm not sure which one is going to win. I'm actually really interested about one of the healthcare providers because they have it's actually a psychiatry practice, but they have a lot of new experimental, I wouldn't say experimental, new and clinically valid therapies and treatments that they're offering at their clinic, and they're very unique because their competitors don't, and they want to scale these therapeutic processes and treatments nationally. And I think that'd be really good for the country, and I think that'd be a real positive thing for me to do next.
Absolutely. Our mental health across the nation it's terrible, and I think that's a beautiful industry to go and work into. There's a huge need there. Before I let you go, I have to comment on your counterintelligence methods. And we didn't get into that in the full conversation, but you when you were whistleblowing, you were actually being surveilled, tracked. There was intel agencies kind of coming after you, and you were able to actually do counter intel operations on them. And I really think, there's some people that have that pressure put on them and they really lose themselves. So, what about you and your mentality got you through that process and being able to identify these people? I mean, that's fascinating. Could you speak to that quickly? I want to respect your time, but that was
Sure.
just that
Yeah,
story. I
that's
was like,
fine.
oh my God.
Well, let's just start off. You look at my career. So I'm not a typical scientist. I was an infantryman, a combat infantryman, and I was, what they say as a joke, kind of, is I was high speed. I was very good at being a military soldier. I did 2 tours. Second one was in Iraq. Made it out mostly unscathed, at least in one piece. So I have all that military training, and I was trained in forensic investigations and criminal investigation while I was in the military. And then I got into some more legal and forensic investigatory work while I was a student. And then I wound up being groomed for a career in biodefense. So then I became an FBI trained epidemiologic and forensic investigator. And then I sort of had my pick of employers, and I chose the national lab path. But I mean, I was really being recruited to the State Department or the CIA, and I stayed away from that for whatever reason. I didn't pick it. So the government probably had been watching me for a long time, but they had trained and dumped all this money into my training in defense and intelligence and investigations. And I can tell you that there's nothing more difficult in the world to investigate than an infectious disease outbreak, because you're trying to chase something you can't see, right? And the evidence that leaves you is you have very little evidence. Chasing and finding the origin of an infectious disease is about the most difficult thing you can investigate. And so I'm good at this. And anyways, when you start to then work in the top secret world, you get the counterintelligence briefings, and you get some of these things. Actually, I had some of these when I was in the military, and you learn the tools of the trade. I had a mentor. She was a senior officer within the CIA who taught me some tradecraft things when I was younger. And basically, if you know how the system works, and you can find out where information is coming from. So in the government, they use what are called compartments. So if you're operating in a compartment, maybe only 5 or 6 people are in that compartment. And once you're read into the program, they tell the person that they're telling you everything that you need to know about this compartment. But what they usually do is they tell you 97, 98% of the information is true, and maybe like 2 or 3% of the information in there is false. So they find out whether or not you're leaking information, whether or not any of that false information comes out of the compartment. They pick up on it right away. Then what that enables
Interesting.
the government to do is to target their investigation back on that compartment and find out who specifically within the compartment is leaking. So when all this craziness started happening, I started operating what's called the zero trust environment. You don't trust anyone, your family members, your neighbors, everyone you meet. So that was a process. I would give everyone 98% the truth and give them 2% lies. And then you just sit and wait, because eventually people talk and they gossip, and you wait to see where the information comes out. And then the other side of this is, so you build the social network and you figure out who's involved. Then you collect physical evidence, fingerprints, license plates, pictures of people. I mean, you just start collecting it, you collect it, you collect it. And then if it goes on long enough, basically these people always it ends up just all boiling to the surface, and you've got the whole thing mapped out. You figure out everyone who's involved, and then you hold all the cards. And that's sort of pretty much the position I'm in now. And it's really sad, because you look at it, there's a lot of politics involved in what happened to me. A lot of money, people did things for money. And it's all sort of sad, because, everyone was trying to take advantage of me and the information for their own purposes. And I'm just was trying to prevent this from happening again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that whoever was your mentor, you got to give that woman some props, because her training and her insights obviously helped you maneuver through that in a graceful way. I mean, the best that you possibly could. As an investigative journalist, I have some ex-CIA contractor connections, and I love learning about the trade craft of all of that. It's like so fascinating to me, just on the investigative side. But you maneuvered through it and you made it to the other side, and wherever you land, I'm sure it's going to be a blessing for whoever you go and end up working with, because your knowledge and your insights and your heart is in the right place. So thank you so much for your advocacy work and taking the time and putting your life on the line to get this information out there to the public. Greatly appreciated. Dr. Andrew Huff, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Kayla.